Okay, you've learned how to find secondary sources. Now, let's learn how to read them. And the way that I teach how to read secondary sources is to use a little system that I call the T.H.O.M.A.S system. And it goes a little something like this. Hi, I'm Daniel Watkins. I'm going to play you a song that I wrote. Topic, historiography, and organization. Method and argument, significance too. Topic, historiography, and organization. Method and argument, and significance too. Yep, there's a song. Let's get going. Okay, so in this video, I'm going to teach you how to use the T.H.O.M.A.S system to analyze essentially secondary sources, but really specifically journal articles and essays. Before we get going, let me first shout out Professor Danna Agmon. She's the one who actually came up with the T.H.O.M.A.S system, and she very graciously allowed me to kind of use it and share it with my students and make a video about it to share it with you. So shout out to Professor Agmon, thank you so much. And without further ado, let's learn how to do this. Okay, so I'm going to organize this video into essentially two parts. In the first part, I'm going to explain the T.H.O.M.A.S system and what that means and looks like. In the second and final part, I'm just going to give you my final tips on reading secondary sources and things you'll want to keep in mind as you go about using T.H.O.M.A.S on those sources. Okay, so let's start. Let's look at what the T.H.O.M.A.S system is. So I like to think of articles and essays sort of like a body. There are distinct parts that have distinct functions for the whole. Remember that works of academic history, aka professional history, are chiefly concerned with making original interpretations about the past. In other words, their primary purpose is to deliver an argument about the past. The first thing that you need to do then is to be aware of that fact and look for what that argument is and how it's delivered in the article or essay. So there are four main parts of an article or essay. The first, what we might call the head, is the introduction. Nearly all articles and essays begin with the same sort of, or with some sort of introduction. And while introductions can vary in content and style, they tend to always accomplish two main things. First, introductions always set up the question of the article. And what I mean by the question is essentially the problem or the thing trying to be solved in the article. What is the article's purpose? That's the question. Sometimes historians are gracious enough to put the question out there in a question form, direct and to the point. Other times, however, and probably more commonly, the question is more inferred by the way that the historian sets up the article. In either case, there's always a question lurking somewhere in the background. Your first task is to try to identify what that question is. The other thing that is nearly always in the introduction is the article or essay's thesis. That is, essentially, the answer to the question. It is the main point of the article. It's the original contribution that the article is trying to make. Most essays will put this right up front in the introduction so that readers know precisely what to look for as they read. The second part of an article or essay is the argument section, or the body of the article. This is the vast majority of the article. Its purpose is to back up the main claim of the thesis. It is to prove to you, the reader, why that thesis is legitimate and solid and believable. Arguments are made of a few distinct elements. First, of course, is the thesis itself. That's the core of the argument, the thing that it all sort of boils down to. But arguments are made of other things too. Second are reasons. Reasons are essentially like mini points or sub-arguments that back up the larger argument. Generally, you're going to find these in the topic sentences of paragraphs. Most arguments are made of lots of reasons, lots of things that back up the central point. Third, the evidence. History is an empirical discipline. That means that we base our scholarship and the knowledge that we produce on the presentation of evidence rather than just sort of theory. So every argument rests its reasons on copious amounts of evidence. And evidence generally takes the form of presentations and analyses of primary sources. Finally, and less frequently, arguments are also comprised of what is called warrants. A warrant is essentially a rhetorical strategy whereby a historian addresses what would be a counter-argument to something that she or he has said. For example, if I were making the argument that Hawaiian pizza is the best type of pizza, I might add a warrant like, I know what you're going to say, pineapple is too acidic and clashes with the tomato sauce, but in fact, the sweetness of the pineapple totally balances the acidity and makes for a perfect pairing with the cheese, tomato, and Canadian bacon. Warrants. Pizza. Delicious. Together, with the thesis, reasons, evidence, and warrants, together all four of these are the main elements of an argument. Okay, 2 more sections. Third is the conclusion. Almost every article and essay has a concluding section of at least a paragraph or 2 that does a few things. First, it generally recaps the main points of the argument. This is just to make sure that the reader caught all the reasons that the author was establishing throughout the course of the article. Second, conclusions generally establish what the significance of the article was. Why was the particular argument worthwhile? What have we learned? This comes out in the conclusion. And finally, some conclusions will also put forward avenues for further research. They will show what the article or essay did not cover, or how future historians can build on the work that's being done in that article. All right, final section, final part of an article are the notes. Remember Ronca and his suggestion that professional historians ought to show precisely what documents and sources they are using to write the history that they're writing? Well, professional historians are still following Ronca and others' example, and placing in notes references to the many sources that they consult for their projects. Notes can either come in the form of footnotes, placed at the bottom of each page, or endnotes, placed at the very end of the article or essay. In those notes, you see not only the sources that the historian is using, but also sometimes the historiographical debate that the historian is engaging in. More on this later. What I'm teaching you here is not really how to read an article. I mean, it is, but really the better way to think of it is kind of like dissecting a frog. The way that you approach an article or essay should be more like a scientist approaching a formaldehyde-soaked amphibian than an article in Time magazine. What you'll be doing is picking apart the article to understand it better. You'll be categorizing, recategorizing, and labeling the article so that you know precisely how it works. That's what T.H.O.M.A.S is going to help you do. Okay, so let's talk about what T.H.O.M.A.S is and how to understand it. First, let's go over what it stands for. T.H.O.M.A.S is an acronym that stands for the various aspects of the article that you need to identify. Again, think of a frog. T.H.O.M.A.S is the list of all the organs that you need to label. As the song explained, and don't worry, I'm not going to play the song again. Here's what it stands for. First is topic. Second is historiography. Third is organization. Fourth is method. Fifth is argument. And sixth is significance. If you can properly identify all of these things, then you have successfully dissected your article or essay. So let's break down what each of these are. The topic is simply what the article is about. But here, since it's a history article, there are a few things that you always have to pay attention to. First, you always have to note the time of the article. What's the period? What are the years? Historians love time. You have to pay attention to that. Second is the where. What is the geographic location of the stuff being described? Third is the who. Who's the main subject of the article? Is it the president of France or is it the working class of Vermont? Whoever the subject is, you have to take note of that when you identify the topic. And finally, there's the what. What is the event or incident or dynamic that's being focused upon? Put this all together and you have the topic. Second is the historiography. What does that mean? Well, this means the particular historiographical debate that the historian is trying to engage in. Here's where it's important to remember our original definition of history that we came up with at the very beginning of the semester. Remember that history is a dynamic process. Historians don't just come up with one answer to questions about the past. Answers are as varied as there are historians come up with them. And that's not because historians are just making stuff up, but rather because historians recognize that the past is infinitely complex. And so the more answers you come up with, the closer you are to understanding the past better and more truthfully. So every historian recognizes that she or he is writing within a larger conversation in which other historians have already taken part. Professional historical articles and essays always make contact with the work of other historians in order to show how that particular article is adding something to the compendium of knowledge that we, as an academic community, have uncovered. This is what we mean by historiography. What is the main scholarly conversation that the article is taking part in? To figure this out, you have to pay attention to the secondary sources that the article cites. These are the historians that the author is seeking to make contact with. Make note of what these pieces are, the books, articles, and essays, and make note of the particular historians that are mentioned. Third is the organization. This is a simple one. It's precisely what we just talked about with the anatomy of the article. Is the article organized chronologically? Great. Make a note of that. Is it thematic? Great. Make a note of that. What are the main sections? What do they correspond to? This is what you put in the organization section of your T.H.O.M.A.S analysis. Fourth is method or methodology. This is simply how the historian undertakes the argument that she or he is undertaking. Most of the time, you find this out by looking at the types of primary sources that the historian uses. As we discussed before, historians often use different types of primary sources, and the types of sources often lead to differences in arguments and perspectives. Ultimately, this will lead you to assess what variety of history the article is. Next comes perhaps the biggest element of all, the argument. This is where you nail down the central thesis of the article, as well as the main reasons and the warrants that back it up. This is essentially where you sketch out what the article is saying. Finally, you have to take note of the significance. Significance is kind of hard to nail down a lot of the time. Good articles will make it clear in the conclusion, but it doesn't always happen. Sometimes you have to read a little bit between the lines. The significance ultimately is the answer to the question, what contribution does this article make? And really the best way to think of this is in terms of a simple arithmetic formula. Significance equals argument plus historiography. In other words, the significance of most articles is simply how the argument of the article adds something to the historiographical debate addressed in the article. Put briefly, the significance is what the article brings to the debate that is new. So that is T.H.O.M.A.S in a nutshell. Well, actually, this is T.H.O.M.A.S in a nutshell. But yeah, this is the system that you will use to analyze all of the articles and essays that you will need to read for your historiographic projects going forward. All right, now you know what T.H.O.M.A.S is. Let me end this video by giving you a little bit of a few more tips about things that I pay attention to when I use the T.H.O.M.A.S system on journal articles and essays. First, when using T.H.O.M.A.S and analyzing secondary sources, I like to use a worksheet that I've created, which is I call the T.H.O.M.A.S worksheet. I posted this worksheet on the Canvas site for this course, so you can use it and use it as a template over and over and over again for every journal article and essay that you read. It helps me keep straight all the various elements of things that I'm trying to analyze when I read a secondary source. Okay, second, with an article or an essay, I always like to either print those out or read them on a kind of e-reader, like a tablet or something like that, so that I can mark it up as I go. Obviously, don't do that if you don't own the thing, right? But if it's a digital thing that you can print out or put on a tablet and sort of mark up, I think it really, really helps to kind of circle things, circle thesis statements, circle big ideas, make notes and stars, and sort of and make sure that you indicate where the sources are and what kinds of sources they are. Engaging with the text in this way helps you not only remember the text better, but it also helps you when you go back to write about the text in your paper or in a historiographic analysis of some sort. You can go back and look and see your notes on the actual text itself and go, okay, I see where the method is. I see kind of where the historiographical conversation is. Okay, final tip. When you're taking notes on T.H.O.M.A.S, always remember to put the page numbers of the pages that you're seeing these elements of T.H.O.M.A.S in. So when you identify what the main thesis is and you want to write that thesis down, make sure that you put the page number on there too, so that you don't lose track of it. Because eventually you're going to want to cite these things, and whether you directly quote it or you paraphrase it or whatever, you're going to have to say which pages that chunk that you're sort of citing or paraphrasing comes from. So never forget to put page numbers on the notes that you take on your secondary sources. Okay, that's it. Good job, good luck, and yeah, we should hear it again. Topic, historiography, and organization. Method and argument, significance too. Topic, historiography, and organization. Method and argument and significance too.